Hi, I am Pasquale Venuti, and today I want to talk about the impression on vertical prep, and specifically the analog impression in two steps. Because along my pathway, I found that two steps approach has given me more predictability and repeatability. At the beginning of my career, I started my journey in dentistry with single step impression using polyether materials, Impragum and Permadyne. But along my pathway, I shift to silicone impression, addition silicons, and two steps approach. Why I shifted to two steps approach? Of course, in literature you can find opposite results on both approaches. Some literature will show you that two step is better, and some literature will show you that single step is better. Anyway, I want to give you my idea about this issue. I shift to two-step impression because it is a stress-free procedure, and I think that we as dentists we should ever use simple and stress-free procedure for being longevous in our practice. Using single step impression, we need to syringe the material inside the mouth around the abutments. And sometimes we have to do a lot of circus with the assistants in order to retract the tongue, retract the cheek, syringe, and then insert the impression tray full of material. With the two-step approach, you don't need to retract anything, and you don't need to syringe any material around the abutments. Everything will be inside the tray. I shift to this approach because it is idiot proof. Following a simple strategy, honestly, there is virtually no possibility to do mistakes. I barely remember a bad impression. Third, because you get the best from material setting. Once you start to mix the material, the molecules of the material starts to reticulate, to shape and form a new reticulum. And especially when we have multiple abutments and we have to syringe the material around the abutments, and then we have to fill up the impression tray, then we have to seat the impression tray. Sometimes 2-3 minutes lapses from the inception of mixing, and the reticulation inside the material has already started to happen. So when you insert the material, you create a shock inside the material, and this will create a distortion. When you do two-step approach, you are very fast. You place the putty material in a few seconds inside the mouth of the patients before reticulation ever happened. And then when you reinsert the tray with putty, the only material that can distort is the light material, but you need just few seconds for mixing the material and placing them out of the patients, because you don't need to syringe anything around the abutments. So you get the best. You get the best because you use the least thickness of material. Because when you use a single step impression, you have a lot of material that is going to shrink. But when you use two-step approach, the only material that will shrink is the light materials, and it's very thin. And you don't need any customized tray because you can use the stock impression tray, the prefabricated ones in stainless steel. So this makes the procedure even very cheap because you use the same impression tray for all the impression. They're endless, those in stainless steel. And you can use cheap material like putty that is 95% of the impression. And one of the biggest advantages is you have a stable and unequivocal position of the tray during the second step. Because when you do one step impression, sometimes it's not easy to find a univoc and stable position of the tray, and in the first seconds the impression tray rocks. And this will create more distortion in the reticulation of the material. But when you use two step, you have just one way to see the impression for the light. So all these advantages convinced me to shift towards the use of two-step approach. It is very fast as well because I use a putty fast and a light fast. So I need a 2 minutes for the putty and a 2 minutes for the light material. Even less. When we consider the impression, of course, we have to choose the material, we have to choose the impression tray, we have to choose the way to do the impression single step and two steps, but we know that we have to treat soft tissues because we have to read, especially in vertical prep, inside soft tissue, because most of the times the prep is subgingival. That's why we need retraction systems and we need some astringent systems for keeping the tissues very dry and the sulcus very dry. This is what I use. I use or aluminum sulfate or aluminum chloride, 25%. I tend to prefer the aluminum sulfate. And as retraction system, I use cord, aid or Teflon. I use knitted cord by Ultrapack. They are very easy to be packed. I use most of the case at 00. Very rarely I use the 000, and I use Teflon with thickness whose thickness is 0.1 millimeter. I use, as I told you before, stainless steel perforated stock trays in different dimensions. And this is one of the best materials I found along my career. It is cheap, it is predictable. It is the Putty Soft from Zenmark Elite HD Plus and Light Body Facet from Zenmark Elite HD. Then I need a blade 50C and a bar for acrylic. I use these two kind of instruments for relieving the putty impression because I strongly suggest do not use any separator when you take putty impression. You have to see the impression tray without any separating medium. You have to read as much as possible, and then you have to customize a bit the putty, as I will show you in a few moments. This is one of the chief and the most important steps if you want to get reliable and predictable two-step impression. How and where to relieve the putty impression. I spent a lot of years find the best solution and for having predictable results. And what I want to show you now is my workflow for treating the putty. So we place the putty inside the stock tray perforated, and then we see it in the mouth of the patient without any separated medium. So this is the impression we register. Now we have a customized tray thanks to the putty, the hardened putty, and at this moment we have to customize the impression before we receive with the light material. And this is the areas we should relieve inside the putty. So this is cheap to understand, because if these areas are not relieved, you will have some distortion and scratches of the putty material when you receive the impression. The critical area are two. The first is the contact areas, because there is an equator. When you extract the putty and then you insert the putty, you can have a scratching of the putty. That's why you have to relieve that area that should be reread by the light material. And at the corners between the occlusal wall and the axial walls, because when you receive the impression tray, you have a strange axis of insertion, and at the beginning the putty can be scratched against the corners, creating distortion of the impression. That's why using this kind of bar is bar designed for acrylic material. You can relieve a bit this kind of area, the red area I draw it in this slide. So you create an extra space around the corners, onto the abutment, and on the proximal surface external to the abutment. Then you will place the light material inside the impression tray and you receive the impression tray. So this area will be reread by the light material without any deformation or scratching of the putty material. So now I will going to show you a full video, a live video of how I do. So the first step is to place a cord inside the sulcus. I use a clammer and then I use a spatula. This is a 00 knitted cord by Ultrapack, impregnated with aluminium sulfate or aluminium chloride. This step is very important because most of the times is the only retraction we do in vertical prep when the sulcus is very shallow. But if the sulcus is very deep, I add a Teflon over the cord. Like in this case, this is a patient with a very deep sulcus, is a pretty patient. So I will place a cord, and over the cord I will place Teflon. I always suggest to place cord before Teflon because placing cord impregnated with aluminium sulfate or chloride will make the sulcus very dry. It will be very easy to place Teflon inside the sulcus and over the cord. Sometimes when you try to place Teflon before the cord, it can be tricky, especially for the people at the beginning. So I always suggest, I repeat, to place the cord 00 impregnated with aluminum sulfate or chloride, and then you'll place Teflon, as in this case. I use 0.1 millimeter Teflon. I roll a bit the Teflon tape, not too much, for avoiding over packing, over density of the Teflon, and then I will start to pack with the spatula. The best trick I can give you for placing Teflon is to have the spatula always wet, because if the spatula is too dry, it tends to stick to the Teflon, making tricky the insertion of Teflon. So the amount of Teflon, it will depend on the depth, on the width of the sulcus. Sometimes I have to pack Teflon a couple of times, sometimes 3 times. It depends, you cannot know since the beginning. If you see that the tissues try to collapse over the abutment, you can add more Teflon. Teflon has a lot of advantages. An impression is completely hydrophobic, it gives a lot of retraction, and it doesn't stick to the impression material. It means that something goes wrong with impression, you can retake impression. But core tend to stick to the impression material, and sometimes this pull out when you extract the impression material. So you have to restart again. If you use Teflon, you can do multiple impressions without moving Teflon. It is completely anti-adherent material. Now I will take impression with putty, the Elite HD putty from Zermark. So you don't need any separator medium. I repeat again, and this is the outcomes. Now I will relieve the corners along the occlusal surface and the interdental areas externally to the abutments, because I want to read the contact areas, the equator of the adjacent teeth with the light material. And with the knife, the 15C knife, I will relieve the undercuts on the soft tissues for creating a more friendly pattern of insertion of the customized tray. Sometimes I relieve also the putty inside the diastema of some teeth. I will place at this moment light material inside the tray and I will insert the impression. So in this way, the procedure is very easy. You don't need to do any circus around the cheek, around the tongue of the patient with assistance. And the impression is always predictable. So what you have to see in the impression is there is no scratch on the putty. If the putty is in contact with the abutment, it's not a problem at all, because putty is a good material for reading the abutment, but it's important that the putty is not scratched. And if you follow the instruction I gave you to relieve the corners between the occlusal wall and the axial walls, and if you relieve the interdental areas, there is no possibility to do mistakes. So I hope you enjoyed the videos. In the next one, I will show you how to do a digital impression in idiot